Hey, welcome back everyone. So in today's video, I'll be drawing a creepy arm for you and showing you how I go about that process. So I'm actually working on a new how to draw book. I'm pretty excited about it, and I've been plugging away at creating these step-by-steps, and I'll be sharing some of those on the channel here with you. Just so you know, at this particular stage, I've already drawn in the lengths, the basic primitive cylinders, and then I went right for the silhouette of the arm, and then the interior anatomy shapes inside the silhouette. So just keep that in mind. I sometimes do that. I don't know. I think it's a very helpful thing to do. We're pretty good at spotting when the silhouette of almost anything isn't right. Now, obviously, this is a stylized, imaginative, creepy arm, so you really could just do whatever you want, but you should still be pretty good at seeing if the silhouette's working. And then again, inlaying the anatomy and the shapes of the muscles inside of there. Obviously, I've already laid in the shape of shadow. A technique that I like to do there is just to turn the opacity down on the line layer and then draw through it with almost like a marker kind of vibe. It's just the solid pen. So, you know, people always ask, like, what software, what pen? Let me say that really doesn't matter as much as most people think, but I'll tell you anyways. It's Procreate, and it's the technical pen, a modified version that you can get on my Gumroad. But again, even though I love custom brushes, and I don't like to talk out of both sides of my mouth here, but at the same time, it's super important that you don't get too caught up in that. If you've got good line control, thick to thin, that's 90% of the battle, at least for the way that I draw and the way that I implement the work. But I do love a good custom brush as well, and it is nice to know that you're using the same settings. So again, I make those available. But now, with those shadows in place, one of the things I want to point out here is that I'm trying to group the shadows together in a connected way. You see most of the shadow up the whole side of the arm is interconnected, except for how it segments to the tricep. You know, the bicep doesn't hit the tricep. But it's really good to play around with how that shadow is unified, and then it can separate into other muscle groups. But a lot of times it looks better if it's all interconnected. So it's going to vary based upon the forms you're trying to shadow and things like that. But something about grouping the shadow together and then slowly breaking it apart into details, into neighboring, things that you're trying to illustrate. And obviously thinking about highs and lows of where the light source is going to hit, plane changes, things like that. But yeah, it's super important. I can't remember where I picked it up. You just practice shadows every chance you get. And I always say that some of my favorite artists for shadows are like David Finch, obviously a fantastic channel on explaining shadows and rendering. And, I look at a lot of the inkers and the way that they implement the shadows. But also even Dale Kean, the way he does shadows and rendering is just, amazing. But actually, the video that I watched not too long ago that explained it was based upon Frazetta, and you can see a clear distinction and difference and transformation of his work when he started to implement shadows differently. So if you want to study a true master at shadows, definitely look at Frazetta's work as well. So that being said, now I'm to the rendering stage, obviously, and this is back to what I mentioned about line control. I'm using very thin lines. I actually find it intriguing or fun to vary that up, to try a illustration or a rendering where I use heavier, thicker weighted lines, and somewhere I use thinner weighted lines, because it just gives me more range. And you have to think that when you're illustrating something at a different size, as far as the end result, the printed size, you're going to need that range of line work. And then also, if you can express that in the illustration itself, and Todd McFarlane does this one really well, where he uses like big shapes of shadows, big bulky lines, and then these tiny little scratchy lines of cross hatching and just all sorts of texture and hatching that really makes the piece, even if it's a face, even if it's an ear, you can make an ear look and feel massive and dimensional based on that expression of various line making. So give it a try. I mean, we all have different styles, but again, I like to practice that variation of that, variety of that, and different illustrations, because I think it just, Well, for one, it's fun. It helps me to not get bored and to constantly be thinking that I'm kind of learning and growing as an artist, not just doing the same thing over and over, which I definitely have the problem of doing as I'm studying. But at the same time, rendering, there's just a plethora of possibilities with rendering. So just really explore that. So I just tend to think about that, experiment, obviously study from other artists, get ideas from the way that they do it. And then also, I'm just thinking about how to shadow this, how to make it have levels of grayscale shading. And then the other thing is when you're rendering is to just say, okay, how do I soften up that harsh black line? Sometimes you want to leave it a bit more harsh as well. So it's not always softening up, but it's kind of like a variation of that. Like, when do I want to soften up the transition of the dark to light? How abruptly do I want to create that transition? Sometimes you're going to want to use longer, thinner lines. Some are going to be more tapered to the shadow side. Some are going to have more cross hatching. And what's really neat as well is you don't have to be as clean as I try to shoot for by any standard. Like, you can really get messy with this stuff. And again, I think that's important to practice as well, so that you find your levels and your areas of texture tend to look better with like a lot of abrupt, scratchy lines. And then there's just styles that use that so well. And so, yeah, just mix it up. Like Mark Silvestri comes to mind. He's got like an areas a very messy style, but it's done in such an elegant way, which I guess those words don't really go together, but he does. It's done in such a masterful way that it doesn't matter that there's a lot of messy kind of lines mixed in. He just knows how to use them, and it works beautifully. So yeah, lots of cool ways to go about it. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video. I'd love to know what you think, as well as what you'd like to see in the future, and more on that book as I produce it. So I hope you'll join me for that. Good luck with the art, and I'll talk to you soon.